My name is Charlotte Bennett. The day my entire family called me a thief, I had not even seen my grandmother's will yet. Even worse, the first person to accuse me was my own sister. And less than an hour after Eleanor Bennett's funeral, the name Charlotte Bennett had become the topic of conversation throughout the entire family. But to understand how any of this happened, we need to go back years earlier, back to where it all began. The Bennett family lived in Charleston, South Carolina. From the outside, they looked like the picture of success. My parents managed several rental properties that had been passed down through generations. Weekend gatherings were always crowded. Family photos always looked perfect. But behind that polished image was a truth everyone knew and nobody ever said out loud. Olivia Bennett was always the center of everything. Olivia was 2 years older than Charlotte. She was beautiful. She was intelligent in a way that made people instantly like her. And most importantly, she knew exactly how to make people feel special. Whenever Olivia walked into a room, every eye seemed to turn toward her. Charlotte was the opposite. She was quiet, reserved, the kind of person who usually sat in a corner with a book or a laptop. If Olivia was the spotlight on center stage, Charlotte was the unseen work happening behind the curtain. From childhood, that difference shaped both of their lives. When Olivia earned a decent grade on a test, their parents celebrated with a special dinner. When Charlotte achieved the highest academic honors in her entire school, the response was often nothing more than a brief nod. At first, Charlotte tried not to let it bother her. She told herself that hard work would eventually earn recognition. But as the years passed, the reality never changed. Olivia was always chosen first, always trusted first, and always forgiven first. There was only one person in the family who saw Charlotte differently. That person was Eleanor. She was not the type who handed out empty compliments. She observed far more than she spoke. While everyone else was captivated by Olivia's charm, Eleanor paid attention to the smallest details. She noticed that Charlotte was always the one who stayed behind to clean up after family gatherings. She noticed that Charlotte remembered everyone's birthdays. She noticed that Charlotte was the only one who regularly visited when she was sick. One summer evening, while the two of them sat on the porch watching the sun sink into the ocean, Eleanor suddenly asked a question. "Do you know why I trust you?" Charlotte shook her head. Eleanor smiled. "Because you do the right thing even when nobody is watching." Charlotte never forgot those words. In the years that followed, she studied forensic accounting. While Olivia constantly jumped from one job to another and chased short-term business ventures, Charlotte quietly built a career, not flashy, not loud, but solid. Eleanor seemed deeply pleased to see that. In fact, several months before her death, she met with her attorney multiple times. Nobody knew what those meetings were about, except Eleanor herself. And her lawyer. When Eleanor Bennett passed away at the age of 86, the entire Bennett family gathered at an old church near Charleston Harbor. A heavy sadness filled the air. People embraced one another. They cried. They shared old memories. Charlotte stood silently in front of her grandmother's portrait. Eleanor had been the only person in the family who trusted her without conditions. She had barely wiped away her tears when Olivia suddenly stood up in the reception hall. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red. A thick folder rested in her hands. The entire room fell silent. Then Olivia spoke, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to talk about this today, but everyone deserves to know the truth." She opened the folder, looked directly at Charlotte, and said a sentence that left the room completely stunned. Charlotte stole Grandma's inheritance before she died. For a moment, nobody spoke, but the looks on their faces began to change. And in that instant, Charlotte realized her life had just taken a completely different direction. Less than 20 minutes after Olivia accused me, I realized something heartbreaking. Nobody in that room wanted to hear the truth. They just wanted someone to blame. And that person was me. The atmosphere inside the church reception hall became so heavy it felt impossible to breathe. Olivia was still standing in the middle of the room, her trembling hands clutching the folder against her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, making her look like a sister devastated by betrayal. She was performing perfectly, so perfectly that even my own parents were drawn into her story. My mother was the first to speak. Her voice shook. "Charlotte, Tell me this isn't true." Before Charlotte could answer, Olivia cut in. "I know she'll deny it, but Grandma's attorney found suspicious transactions." The room erupted immediately. Relatives began looking at Charlotte differently. Gone were the sympathetic expressions reserved for someone who had just lost her grandmother. Now there was only suspicion. Her father stepped forward. His face was red with anger. He snatched the folder from Olivia's hands. The more he read, the darker his expression became. Charlotte struggled to remain calm. She knew she was innocent. She knew something was wrong with those documents. But at that moment, she had no evidence to defend herself. The only thing she had was the truth. And the truth was the one thing nobody wanted to hear. Her father slowly raised his head. The look in his eyes was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was not disappointment. It was contempt. "Did you take your grandmother's money?" Charlotte froze. "I didn't take anything." Olivia broke into tears. "I don't want to believe it either. But I checked everything over and over again." Those words felt like the final knife. The entire room immediately shifted to Olivia's side. One aunt shook her head. "I never thought Charlotte would do something like this." A cousin sighed heavily. "Money changes people." Charlotte looked around the room. Not a single person stood beside her. Not a single person asked if she had an explanation. Not even her parents. Finally, her father pointed toward the door. "You should leave." A chill ran through Charlotte's entire body. "This is Grandma's funeral." His response came cold and hard. "Then you shouldn't have done something that would disappoint her." That was the moment her heart truly shattered. Not because of the accusation, but because her parents were willing to believe the worst about their own daughter. Without evidence, without questions, without giving her even a single chance to explain. Charlotte walked out of the church into the cold afternoon rain. Nobody followed her. Nobody called her name. Nobody asked if she was okay. Her car sat alone in the nearly empty parking lot. When the door closed behind her, she remained motionless for a long time. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Eleanor had just died. And in a single day, Charlotte had lost her entire family too. The weeks that followed were even worse. Rumors spread quickly across Charleston. Some people claimed she had stolen Eleanor's money. Others said she had taken advantage of an elderly woman. A few even insisted she had manipulated family property documents for years. Nobody knew the truth. But everyone enjoyed repeating the story. The consequences arrived faster than she expected. A major client suddenly terminated their contract with her company. A business partner canceled a meeting that had been scheduled for months. People she once considered close began keeping their distance. Every morning, Charlotte woke up feeling as if she were living in a city that had already convicted her. She tried contacting her parents again and again. No response. Text messages went unanswered. Phone calls were rejected. Emails disappeared into silence. By Christmas that year, Charlotte sat alone in her small apartment scrolling through family photos posted on social media. She wasn't in any of them. It was as if she had never existed. That was also the moment she made the most important decision of her life. If she could not change what people believed, she would change her future instead. She buried herself in work, worked harder, studied harder, built her company one step at a time. Years passed. The rumors slowly faded, but the scars remained. 3 years later, Charlotte Bennett was no longer the woman who had been thrown out of her grandmother's funeral. She had become one of the most sought-after forensic accountants in the region. Major corporations came to her for help. Attorneys sought her expertise. Even government investigators had begun recognizing her name. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, while Charlotte was reviewing reports in her office, her assistant walked in looking unusually tense. "There are 2 men here to see you. They say they're from the federal government." Charlotte frowned. Moments later, 2 men in suits entered the room. The older one placed a thick file on her desk. Then he said something that left Charlotte completely stunned. "We're investigating a major financial fraud case, and the person at the center of it is Olivia Bennett. 3 years ago, Olivia convinced our entire family that I was a thief. Now, 2 federal investigators were sitting across from me with a file bearing her name." For several seconds, Charlotte said nothing. She stared at the name Olivia Bennett printed across the cover. A strange feeling ran down her spine. It was not satisfaction. It was not happiness. It was simply the sense that something enormous was about to come apart. The older investigator opened the file. "We're investigating a series of unusual financial transactions involving assets belonging to elderly individuals." Charlotte frowned slightly. He continued, "Some of the accounts lead to intermediary companies. Several signatures show signs of possible forgery. And the name that appears most frequently is Olivia Bennett." Charlotte sat up straighter. She immediately understood the seriousness of what he was saying. If this information was accurate, this was no longer a family dispute. This was a criminal investigation. The investigator slid several copies of documents across the desk. "We need an independent expert. You have the qualifications to help us analyze this entire network of transactions." Charlotte lowered her eyes to the documents. At first, she considered refusing. Olivia was her sister. No matter what had happened between them, participating in an investigation involving a family member was not an easy decision. Then she saw a familiar signature, Eleanor Bennett. Her grandmother. Charlotte felt her heartbeat quicken. "Are you certain these documents are connected to my grandmother?" The investigator nodded. "That's exactly why we're here." The investigation officially began 1 week later. Charlotte did not participate as Eleanor's granddaughter. She participated as a forensic financial specialist. She reviewed every transaction, every account, every contract. She worked with investigators during the day. At night, she continued examining records from her office. The deeper she dug, the colder she felt. At first, the transfers were small. Then they became larger. Then there were limited liability companies established under other names. Together, they formed a financial maze designed to hide the movement of money. But there was one problem. The person who built that maze was not nearly as clever as they thought. And Charlotte was exceptionally good at what she did. 3 weeks later, the picture started becoming clear. Olivia had not simply taken money after Eleanor passed away. Everything had started years earlier. While the family placed absolute trust in their perfect daughter, Olivia had quietly gained access to Eleanor's accounts. A little at a time, not enough to attract attention, not enough to raise suspicion, but enough when stretched across years. The total amount eventually became so large that even the investigators were stunned. Charlotte sat silently in front of her computer screen. She remembered Olivia crying at the funeral. She remembered the fake heartbreak in her eyes. She remembered every accusation thrown at her, and now she finally understood. It had never been a misunderstanding. It had been a plan, a carefully prepared plan. And Charlotte had been the perfect scapegoat. As more evidence emerged, an even darker truth came to light. The documents Olivia had used to frame Charlotte years earlier had been created from the very fraudulent transactions investigators were now uncovering. She needed someone to take the blame. She needed another name to draw attention away from herself. And Charlotte had been the perfect choice. The daughter the family was always ready to doubt. One afternoon, Charlotte's phone rang. It was her father, the first call in more than 3 years. His voice was tense. "I heard there's some kind of investigation happening." Charlotte remained silent for a few seconds. He continued. "Olivia says someone is trying to set her up." Charlotte looked out the window. Dark, gray clouds covered the Charleston sky. Years ago, she would have longed for this phone call. She would have prayed for her father to finally listen. But everything was different now. "I'm not setting anyone up. I'm doing my job." For a moment, he said nothing. For the first time in years, the certainty in his voice was gone. "But she's your sister." Charlotte slowly closed her eyes. "No, she's the person who destroyed my life." The call ended in silence. 1 week later, the first witness came forward. Then a second. Then a third. A retired bank employee, a former accountant, a property manager. One by one, they provided additional pieces of the puzzle. And every piece pointed in the same direction, Olivia Bennett. Eventually, the lead investigator walked into Charlotte's office with a serious expression. "A preliminary indictment has been prepared. The prosecutors believe they have enough evidence." Charlotte did not feel victorious. She only felt tired, because the truth was finally coming to light. But the cost had been far too high. That afternoon, as she prepared to leave the office, her assistant called out from the doorway, "There's someone here to see you." Charlotte stepped outside and froze. Olivia was sitting in the reception area. The confidence was gone. The familiar smile was gone. The woman who had spent her entire life being admired was gone. All that remained was a pale woman, terrified. And for the first time in her life, Olivia Bennett was truly afraid. As Charlotte approached, Olivia slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red from crying. Then she said something Charlotte never imagined she would hear. "I need your help. My name is Charlotte Bennett." For 3 years, I had imagined hundreds of times what it would feel like when Olivia finally faced the truth. But when that moment actually arrived, the feeling was completely different. There was no victory, no satisfaction, only a deep and unexpected sadness. Olivia sat across from me in the small conference room at my office. Outside the glass windows, the last light of the day was slowly disappearing behind the buildings. Inside, for the first time in her life, the sister who had always controlled every story no longer knew what to say. She stared down at the table for a long time. Then, she finally spoke. "I know they're about to charge me." Charlotte said nothing. Olivia let out a faint laugh. It was a tired laugh. "I guess you're happy about this." Charlotte shook her head. "No." The answer caught Olivia off guard. For years, she had believed her younger sister was waiting for the perfect chance to get revenge. But Charlotte was no longer the woman who had been thrown out of her grandmother's funeral. She had spent too many years building her life. She no longer had the energy for hatred. The silence lingered for several seconds. Then Olivia started crying. Not the dramatic crying the family had become accustomed to over the years. This was the sound of someone who could no longer run from herself. "I hated you." The words echoed through the room. Charlotte looked up. Olivia wiped her eyes. "I've hated you since we were kids. Grandma trusted you. People started respecting you. Every time you succeeded, it felt like I was losing something." Charlotte sat frozen. It was the first truly honest thing Olivia had ever said. There was no victim act anymore. No manipulation. Only raw truth. Olivia lowered her head. "When Grandma changed the estate documents, I knew. I overheard her conversation with the lawyer. I knew she didn't trust me the way she used to. And I panicked." Charlotte felt a lump rise in her throat. So many years, so much pain, so much loss. All of it had started with that jealousy. Then Olivia revealed something that even Charlotte had not expected. "I prepared the fake documents before the funeral. If anyone discovered the missing money, I needed someone to take the blame, and that person was you." The room fell silent. Charlotte looked at the woman sitting across from her. The woman who had taken 3 years of her life. The woman who had turned her entire family against her. The woman who had destroyed her reputation in the eyes of the people she loved most. And yet at that moment, Olivia looked small, almost pitiful. The meeting ended without shouting, without forgiveness, without a tearful reconciliation. There was only the truth. And sometimes the truth weighs more than any punishment. 2 months later, the investigation was officially made public. Financial records, witness statements, evidence, everything pointed in the same direction. There was no doubt left. The Bennett family finally learned the full truth. One evening, Charlotte's parents appeared at her front door. For the first time in more than 3 years, her mother looked much older. The lines on her face seemed deeper. Her eyes were red from crying. Her father stood behind her. His posture was no longer as strong as it once had been. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then her mother broke down. "I'm sorry." Charlotte felt her heart tighten. It was the apology she had waited years to hear. But now that it had finally arrived, everything felt different. Her mother stepped into the living room. She pulled a stack of papers from her purse. They were the emails Charlotte had sent years earlier. The emails her mother had never read. "I've read every one of them. Every message. Every line." Her voice trembled. "You tried to explain. You begged us to listen. And I never gave you the chance." Charlotte's father remained silent. A long time passed before he finally spoke. Throughout his entire life, apologizing had never come easily to him, but this time was different. He looked directly at his daughter. "I failed you," just 3 words. But for the first time in her life, Charlotte felt that her father truly saw her, not the forgotten daughter, not the shadow standing behind Olivia, but her. Charlotte did not forgive them that day, and she refused to pretend that nothing had happened. Instead, she set conditions. If they wanted a relationship with her again, it had to begin with honesty. They had to attend family therapy. They had to take responsibility for what they had done. And for the first time, nobody argued. The months that followed moved slowly, sometimes painfully, sometimes awkwardly, but they were real. There were no more lies, no more hidden secrets. One spring morning, the family gathered at Eleanor's old beach house. The house had recently been restored. Charlotte stood in front of the fireplace, gently placing Eleanor's photograph on the mantel. Her parents stood beside her. Outside, the sound of waves rolled in from the shore. For several minutes, nobody spoke, but the silence felt different from the silence of previous years. It no longer carried distance, it carried hope. Her father walked over to the dining table. He looked around the room and asked a very simple question. "Can I help with anything?" Charlotte froze for a moment. Because throughout her entire childhood, he had never asked her that question. Not once. A small smile appeared on her face. "Yes. You can help me set the table." Her father nodded, quietly doing exactly that. And in that ordinary moment, Charlotte finally understood what Eleanor had meant all those years ago. The truth does not always win immediately, but eventually it always finds a way to be seen. I never took revenge on my sister. I never destroyed her life. I simply kept living, kept moving forward, kept becoming the person my grandmother always believed I could be. And in the end, the truth did the rest. If you were in Charlotte's position, would you be able to forgive your family after everything that happened? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family stories filled with hidden truths, powerful revelations, and meaningful life lessons, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.